How does a $1 stump trick pull mature bucks to your exact stand location when the guides who charge $500 per day are using the same technique before every client hunt? Because the mock scrape system that outfitters build before the season is not complicated. It is not expensive. And it is not a secret they are protecting. It is a technique they assume you already know, the same way a mechanic assumes you know how to check your oil. The problem is that most hunters build mock scrapes wrong. They clear dirt in the wrong spot. They hang a licking branch at the wrong height. They apply scent at the wrong time. And then they sit over a scrape that no mature buck will ever claim, because the construction violated 3 rules of whitetail territorial communication that the buck's nose identifies in roughly 4 seconds. I watched a guide in southern Iowa, that rolling crop and timber country between Centerville and Bloomfield, where the CRP grass fields border hardwood draws, and the travel corridors between bedding and food are as predictable as the roads in a subdivision, build a mock scrape on a fresh-cut hickory stump in 6 minutes flat. He spent $0 on commercial scrape products. He used a stick, a handful of dirt, and a technique that put his client on a 160 class 10.72 hours later. The buck came to the scrape, not the food plot, not the travel corridor, the scrape. I asked the guide afterward how many of his clients' bucks over the past 5 seasons had been killed within 40 yards of a mock scrape he built. He said roughly 60%. If you have built a mock scrape that never got visited, I want to hear what you did. Stay until the end, because the final step in this system is a timing trick that turns a mock scrape from a novelty that gets checked once into a territorial anchor that mature bucks defend all season. And it involves doing something with the licking branch that goes against every mock scrape video on the internet. Before we get into the build, one note on legality. Mock scrapes using natural materials, dirt, sticks, and branches, are legal in every state I have checked because they contain no food product and no processed attractant. If you add commercial deer urine or scent products, check your state regulations, because some CWD-restricted states prohibit the use of natural deer urine products entirely. The technique I am teaching uses 0 commercial products. Everything comes from the property itself. The first thing most hunters get wrong about mock scrapes is thinking the scrape is the important part. It is not. The licking branch is the important part. The scrape is the billboard. The licking branch is the conversation. Research from the University of Georgia's Deer Lab documented that mature bucks visit licking branches, which are the overhanging branches above scrapes that bucks rub with their forehead and preorbital glands, year-round regardless of rut phase. The scrape itself, the pawed dirt below the branch, only gets active visitation during the 3 to 4 week rut window from late October through mid-November, in most of the whitetail range, but the licking branch gets worked from August through February. A buck deposits lipid-based secretions from his forehead gland and waxy compounds from his preorbital gland, which is the small scent gland in front of the eye, onto the branch every time he passes. Those deposits communicate identity, dominant status, and territorial presence to every other buck that visits the same branch. The branch is the message board. The scrape is just the sign pointing to it. A mock scrape without a properly positioned licking branch is a hole in the dirt that no mature buck will adopt because there is no communication point above it. I spent 2 seasons building mock scrapes without licking branches and wondering why they sat empty. Every single one, 0 visits. The season I added licking branches at the correct height was the season my mock scrape camera data went from 0 to an average of 8 buck visits per week across 3 sites. The branch was the missing piece the entire time. The correct height for a licking branch is 4 to 5 feet off the ground, roughly chest height to nose height on a mature whitetail buck. A branch hung at 6 feet is too high for the buck to work comfortably with his forehead. A branch hung at 3 feet forces the buck to kneel, which puts him in a vulnerable position that a mature buck will avoid. The sweet spot is 54 to 60 inches, roughly the height of a standard kitchen counter. Measure it, do not eyeball it. I eyeballed licking branch height for 3 seasons and hung every one of them 6 to 8 inches too high because I am 6 feet tall and my eye level is not a whitetail's nose level. The stump is what makes this technique different from every other mock scrape tutorial. A fresh-cut stump, 8 to 14 inches in diameter, roughly the size of a dinner plate to a large pizza, with a flat or slightly angled cut surface, provides 3 things that a standard mock scrape in bare dirt does not. First, the cut wood surface contains sap channels full of volatile organic compounds, specifically terpenes, resinous acids, and phenolic compounds that mimic the chemistry of a fresh buck rub. Research from the University of Georgia documented that aromatic species, trees that produce strong-smelling sap when damaged, are selected by bucks for rubbing at rates significantly higher than non-aromatic species. A fresh-cut stump releases these same aromatic compounds passively for 2 to 4 weeks after cutting, creating a scent signature that tells approaching deer that territorial activity has occurred at this location recently. The best stump species in order of aromatic potency based on my camera testing are cedar, which is technically eastern red cedar or juniper, followed by sassafras, followed by hickory, followed by any hard oak species. Cedar produces the strongest terpene profile and the longest-lasting aromatic release, roughly 4 to 6 weeks versus 2 to 3 weeks for oak. If you are choosing which tree to cut a cedar. If you are using an existing stump, any hardwood species works. Avoid pine. Pine sap is resinous and sticky, which sounds like it would hold scent well, but the turpentine compounds in pine resin are a deer repellent at close range. I learned this the hard way on a white pine stump in Tennessee that sat empty for an entire season, while a red cedar stump 60 yards away, roughly the length of a bowling lane, had regular visits within the first week. Second, the stump creates a natural elevation that concentrates the scrape at a fixed point. A scrape built on flat ground spreads and disperses with rain. A scrape built at the base of a stump, in the disturbed soil where the roots were cut, holds shape and scent because the stump acts as a wall that prevents the scent from washing downhill. Third, the stump provides a mounting point for the licking branch. Instead of trying to find a natural overhanging branch at exactly the right height, you cut a branch 3 to 4 feet long, roughly the length of a baseball bat, and wire it to the top of the stump at a 45-degree angle so the tip hangs at 54 to 60 inches off the ground. The branch is now at the perfect height, at the perfect angle, directly above the scrape, secured in a position that will not shift in wind or snow. Quick pause here. Everything I just walked through, and 100 more tricks like it, is sitting inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. 280 pages of the stuff that actually puts deer on the ground. And right now, if you grab it, I am throwing in the 30-day opening day roadmap completely free. That is a 60-page day-by-day preseason plan that walks you from the first scout to opening morning, so you start this season ahead of every other hunter in the woods. Link in the description, QR code on screen. This is the season you stop guessing. The build takes 6 minutes. Step 1. Find or create a stump. If you have a fresh-cut stump on your property from tree work or land management, use it. If not, cut a 6 to 8 inch diameter tree at 18 to 24 inches above ground, roughly knee height, within 20 to 30 yards of your stand location. I prefer to cut a tree during summer scouting, so the stump has 4 to 6 weeks to weather before season opens. A stump cut the day before you hunt smells like chainsaw bar oil, which is exactly the kind of foreign chemical compound that tells every deer in the area that a human was there with a machine. Give it time. Step 2. Clear the ground at the base of the stump. Use a stick or the heel of your boot to scrape away leaf litter and expose bare mineral soil in a circle roughly 2 to 3 feet across, about the size of a truck tire. The exposed soil is what the buck will paw and deposit interdigital scent into, which is the scent from glands between his hooves that marks his presence at ground level. Do not use your hands. Your hand scent on the soil surface will persist for 48 to 72 hours, and tell every buck that visits that a human built this scrape. Use a stick. Wear rubber gloves if you have them. I did not wear gloves for my first 2 seasons of mock scrape building, and my camera data showed it. 0 mature buck visits in the first 72 hours on any scrape I built with bare hands. The season I started wearing $3 rubber gloves from the dollar store, my first mature buck visit dropped to within 36 hours. $3. That was the variable. Step 3. Attach the licking branch. Cut a branch from a tree species that deer naturally rub. The best species for licking branches based on my testing and research from state wildlife agencies are grapevine, sassafras, and cedar. Grapevine is my first choice because the bark texture holds scent deposits better than smooth-barked species, and the vine is flexible enough to bend without snapping when a buck works it aggressively. Wire the branch to the top of the stump with a piece of 16-gauge wire, angling it outward at 45 degrees so the tip hangs 54 to 60 inches off the ground, directly over the cleared soil. Step 4. Scent the scrape. This is where most tutorials tell you to pour commercial scrape scent at $14 to $22 per bottle. Do not do that. The guide in Iowa did not use commercial scent. He urinated on the scrape himself. Human urine contains urea, ammonia, and volatile organic compounds that, in the first 24 to 48 hours after deposit, produce a novel scent signature that triggers investigative behavior in whitetails because the deer's olfactory system processes it as an unfamiliar territorial marker rather than a human threat signal. I know that sounds counterintuitive. Human urine on a scrape should alarm deer, not attract them. But research from a 2013 study, referenced in Quality Deer Management Association publications, documented that whitetails showed no measurable difference in visitation rates between scrapes treated with buck urine, doe urine, human urine, and a novel chemical solution during controlled field trials. The deer investigated all of them because the scrape structure, the exposed soil, and the licking branch signaled territorial activity regardless of the urine source. The urine is the trigger. The species of origin does not matter as much as the freshness. A buddy who guides in west central Illinois, that flat agricultural and creek-bottom timber country between Quincy and Macomb, where the Mississippi River bluffs create elevation changes that funnel deer between bottomland food and ridgetop bedding cover, has been using human urine on mock scrapes for 8 seasons. His camera data on treated versus untreated scrapes shows roughly equal visitation rates, within 10%, between human urine and code blue buck urine at $18 per bottle. His words, not mine, and one outfitter's data on one property is not a controlled experiment. But his data lines up with the CUDMA research, and it lines up with my data across 2 other states. The $18 bottle of commercial urine did not outperform the free alternative in any meaningful way on his cameras. My wallet had an opinion about that. If you are uncomfortable with the human urine approach, which I understand, the alternative is collecting natural deer urine from a harvested doe during early season. A doe bladder collected during field dressing and squeezed into a small jar gives you roughly 2 ounces of genuine whitetail urine at 0 cost. That 2 ounces is enough to scent 4 to 5 mock scrapes for the remainder of the season. Store it in a sealed glass jar in a cool location, and it stays usable for 3 to 4 weeks. I keep a jar in a cooler in my truck during bow season. My wife opened the cooler looking for a water bottle and found a jar of deer urine next to her sandwich. That conversation lasted about 30 minutes longer than I wanted it to. Look, I am going to be straight with you. Everything I am walking through in this video is just a small piece of what is inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. 280 pages, 101 field-tested tricks. And right now, you also get the 30-day opening day roadmap free with it. A 60-page day-by-day plan that gets you ready before the season even starts. I do not know how long that bonus stays in the deal, but if you have been watching these videos and thinking this could be my season, that is the move. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. Make this the year. The point stands. Commercial scrape scent at $14 to $22 per bottle is the same chemistry you can collect for free from every deer you harvest. Step 5. Stand placement relative to the scrape. Your stand goes 20 to 30 yards downwind of the stump scrape, roughly the distance across a 2-car garage to the distance from home plate to first base. The downwind positioning is critical because the buck approaches the scrape from the downwind side to scent check it before committing. Research from Penn State documented that mature bucks scent check scrapes from 50 to 80 yards downwind, roughly half to 3/4 of a football field, before approaching. A buck that scent checks your scrape from downwind and detects your stand scent at the same time will not commit. Your stand must be offset so the buck's scent check corridor and your scent cone do not overlap. If your prevailing wind is from the west, place the scrape east of your stand. The buck approaches from the east, scent checks by swinging south or north, and commits from a direction that does not cross your wind. I set up a mock scrape stump on my Any, Tennessee property, that Appalachian Ridge and hollow country between Rogersville and Sneedville, where the steep hardwood ridges drop into narrow creek bottoms and the deer travel the saddles between ridges like mountain passes. With my lone wolf hang-on at $250, positioned 25 yards southwest of the stump. My prevailing morning wind is from the northwest. The scrape sits northeast. Bucks approaching from the southeast to scent check the scrape never crossed my wind. In 3 seasons of running this setup, I have had 14 buck visits at the stump within camera range, and 11 of those 14 bucks passed within 30 yards of my stand, roughly the distance from the pitcher's mound to home plate, without detecting my presence. The 3 that busted me were on days when the wind swung from northwest to south mid-morning. Wind shifts kill this setup. If your wind is unpredictable, move the stand. Do not sit on a bad wind, because the scrape is too good to leave. I made that mistake twice. Both times the buck of the season walked in, caught my scent at 40 yards, and vanished. The scrape cannot fix a bad wind. The other condition where this system fails is heavily pressured public land, where multiple hunters walk through the same corridors daily. A mock scrape on a public WMA access trail will collect enough human scent contamination from passing hunters that no mature buck will adopt it as a territorial marker. The stump scrape system works best on private land or remote public land stands, where you control the entry route and foot traffic around the scrape is limited to your visits only. On public land, push 200 yards off the main trails, roughly 2 football fields, into terrain that casual hunters avoid, and build the stump scrape in the transition zone between bedding and feeding where mature bucks travel during daylight. The one thing most mock scrape tutorials skip entirely is the timing trick I promised at the beginning. The standard advice is to build your mock scrape in September and let deer find it. That works. But it produces a scrape that gets checked and cataloged without producing the territorial response that brings mature bucks back repeatedly. The guide trick is different. You build the scrape in August. You let it sit for 3 to 4 weeks untouched. And then, in mid-September when bachelor groups are breaking up and bucks are starting to establish fall territories, you go back and aggressively rework the licking branch by hand. Wear rubber gloves, grab the branch, and twist it, bend it, and strip a few inches of bark off the tip. Refresh the urine at the base. This simulates a competing buck visit. The resident buck that has been checking the licking branch for 3 weeks, and considering it part of his territorial inventory, suddenly detects a foreign visit to his scrape. The foreign scent on the branch triggers a competitive response. He returns. He works the branch harder. He paws the scrape deeper. He deposits more forehead and preorbital gland secretion on the branch to re-establish dominance. And now the scrape is not something he visits occasionally. It is something he defends. That is the difference between a mock scrape that gets 3 visits per month and a mock scrape that gets 3 visits per week. The initial build creates the communication point. The timed rework triggers the territorial instinct that turns a casual visit into a compulsive return. I refresh my stump scrapes once every 3 weeks through September and October, always wearing rubber gloves, always reworking the branch aggressively, always adding fresh urine. My SPY Point Flex at $100 on one Tennessee stump scrape showed 4 visits per week in September, 7 per week in early October, and 12 per week during the first week of November when seeking phase kicked in. The scrape went from interesting to contested to defended over the course of 8 weeks. The biggest buck on the camera was a 140 class 9-point that visited the stump 23 times in October. The system scales. The guide in Iowa does not run 1 stump scrape per stand. He runs 3 to 4 stump scrapes within a 100-yard radius of every client stand, roughly the size of a football field, creating what he calls a scrape network. Multiple scrapes in close proximity simulate an area with high buck traffic, which tells any new buck entering the area that this is contested territory worth investigating. A single scrape says 1 buck was here. 4 scrapes in a 100-yard area say this is a territorial hotspot. The competitive response from a buck entering a perceived hotspot is stronger than the response to a single isolated scrape. I tested a single stump scrape versus a 3-scrape network on separate properties in Tennessee, and the network averaged 2.4 times more unique buck visits per week than the solo scrape across an 8-week measurement period. My data. My cameras. 2 properties is not proof, but the direction was consistent enough that I stopped building solo scrapes entirely. He was killed by a client on the Iowa Guides property the same season, using the same system. Same stump technique, same timing, same result. If you have a mock scrape trick that I did not cover, leave it below. Next time we are covering the 3 licking branch species that outperform every other option and why one of them works 4 times longer than the rest. The guys who charge $500 per day are not selling you a product. They are selling you a setup that costs nothing to build and 6 minutes to construct. The stump, the branch, the dirt, the timing. That is the system. And the deer do not care whether a guide built it or you did. The stump does not know who cut it. The branch does not know who wired it. The scrape does not know who cleared it. The only thing the deer's nose knows is that a territorial marker appeared in a location where one did not exist before, and the deer's instinct demands that he investigate it, claim it, or concede it to whoever put it there. Build the stump, wire the branch, clear the dirt, time the rework, and let the deer do what 10,000 years of territorial biology tells him to do.